Welcome to the Made for More Ministries podcast, where we are going to explore the intersection of faith in real life and deeper purpose. Today's episode tackles a question that especially is relevant in our modern, highly educated, and technologically advanced world. How can Christians believe in miracles given everything that we know about science? It's a fair question. Our generation has decoded DNA, mapped galaxies, created artificial intelligence, and we're still out here talking about seas parting and dead people rising and burning bushes that speak. So do Christians just ignore science to keep believing in ancient miracle stories? Is faith irrational, or is there a deeper harmony between science and Christianity that we have been led to believe? So I want to dig into what science actually is and what it isn't, the nature of miracles from a biblical standpoint, and how the Christian worldview supports both scientific discovery and divine intervention, and how to respond when someone says, "I'll believe it when I see it." So, what is science really? Before we talk about miracles, we need to define science. Science is a method of studying the natural world, a tool we use to observe, test, and understand how things work. It's not anti-God. In fact, some of the greatest scientific minds in history were Christians. A couple of them to name is Isaac Newton, laws of motion, gravity. He was deeply religious. Gregor Mendel, father of genetics, he was a monk. And Francis Collins, former head of the Human Genome Project, and he was a devout Christian. So science isn't at odds with belief in God. It's the study of what normally happens, laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. But miracles are, by definition, what doesn't normally happen. They're not violations of science, they're exceptions to the usual patterns. C.S. Lewis put it this way: if God created nature, then he can suspend or alter its laws if he chooses. In other words, if God made the rules, he can work outside them. That's not breaking science. That's being bigger than it. So if we look at miracles, what are miracles biblically? The Bible is full of miracles, but they're never random or showy for the sake of spectacle. They always serve a purpose. So if we look at a few, the first one would be parting of the Red Sea. In Exodus 14, God parts the waters to deliver his people from slavery in Egypt. This wasn't a magic trick. It was a rescue mission, a sign of God's power to save people. And another one would be Jesus feeding the 5,000. In John 6, Jesus multiplies a few loaves and fish to feed a huge crowd. This wasn't about showing off. It was about revealing that he is the true bread of life. And another one would be healing the sick and raising the dead. Jesus healed the blind, cured lepers, and even raised Lazarus from the dead, not to dazzle people, but to point to who he was, the Son of God with authority over life and death. Miracles in Scripture are signs, evidence of God's presence, power, and his purpose. So the real question isn't, can miracles happen? The question is, if God exists, why would miracles not be possible? So if we think about the question, aren't miracles just myths from a pre-scientific age? Some skeptics argue that biblical miracles were made up by people who didn't know how science works. So they saw lightning and said, must be God. But it's not true. Even in Bible times, when people knew, dead people stayed dead. That's why Lazarus being raised was such a big deal, because people were supposed to stay dead. And take Joseph in Matthew 1. He hears Mary is pregnant and immediately assumes a natural cause, that she had been with another man. Even 2,000 years ago, people understood biology enough to know where babies came from. So the difference wasn't that they were ignorant. The difference was they believed the supernatural was possible, living outside of what the science would deem as normal. Today, we often reject miracles not because that they've been disproven, but because we've bought into a worldview that says only what I can test and measure and see, feel, touch is real. But think about that. Can love be measured in a lab? What about beauty? Or opinions? Justice? Consciousness? Some of the most important things in life aren't quantifiable, but they're still real. And science is great at explaining how things work, but it struggles with the why, because faith speaks to the why. So when you think about science and Christianity, and sometimes, unfortunately, this war between them, contrary to popular belief, science and Christianity, they're not enemies. In fact, Christianity gave rise to modern science because the Christian worldview says the universe is created by a rational God. It operates under consistent laws, and humans are made in God's image, capable of discovering truth. That's the foundation of the scientific method. So rather than conflicting, Christianity laid the intellectual groundwork for science. Believers pursued science not in spite of faith, but because of it. So here's the key. Science explains the natural. Christianity allows for both the natural and the supernatural. It's not either or, it's and both. Science studies the repeatable. Miracles are one-time personal acts of God. You don't throw out science because miracles can happen. Just like you don't throw out your understanding of gravity just because someone once jumped and touched the rim. So if you think about the greatest miracle of all, it would be the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus is the cornerstone of Christian faith. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. That is a strong claim, and it begs the question, do we believe the resurrection happened? Because if it did, then every other miracle is plausible. So here's what's compelling. Jesus' tomb was empty. His followers who had abandoned him in fear became bold preachers, most dying for the claim that he rose again. And skeptics like Paul and James, Jesus' own brother, became believers after encountering the risen Christ. And the early church exploded in growth, not because Jesus was a good teacher, but because they believed he was alive. So if we accept that God raised Jesus from the dead, a miracle confirmed by history and testimony and transformed lives, then every other miracle in Scripture becomes not just possible, but consistent with God's nature. So a big question would be, how do we respond to this skepticism? Sometimes it's hard to respond to people that are very skeptical when we know what we know as Christians. But I know for me, when I'm in the moment on the spot, it's hard to find words to say what I want to say based on how I feel and what I know. Because let's be real, if you tell someone you believed in miracles today, they might roll their eyes, think you're crazy. So how do we want to respond? I would say the biggest thing to start off with is just don't be defensive, be honest. You don't have to win an argument, especially because there's going to be people out there that are trying to argue, and the goal isn't to win. Share your personal faith journey. Maybe challenge people because they may challenge your theology, but they can't deny your story, and we have to do it in a loving way. And ask questions in return. I love asking questions because it turns them from attack mode to being able to actually have a one-on-one civil conversation most times. And sometimes it's better to just respond with a question. If God's real, wouldn't miracles make sense? Or what do you believe about the origin of the universe? And that kind of gives you some baseline for where they're at. And what would have to happen for you to believe that a miracle occurred? Even things like miracle babies, how don't you call that a miracle? This invites conversation rather than the debate. And point to changed lives. The best proof of God's power isn't always parting the seas, it's transformed hearts. Addiction broken, marriages healed, forgiveness where there was so much hate. Those are the modern day miracles. And when someone sees a life radically changed, it's hard to argue that. And if you can pull some of those miracles out of your own life, like this is where I was at, and I had every reason not to forgive, and I chose to anyway, and only the Jesus inside of me could have done that. That's exactly verbatim what I have told people based on situations that I have gone through. And I want people to know it's the Jesus within me. It's not me, because I am an imperfect, human being on this ball of mud in this broken world, the Jesus within me is what allows me to want to be better and make better decisions and make this, world a better place. So I think one of the challenges some Christians find is, can we be scientific and still believe? And the answer is absolutely, because you can study medicine and believe in healing. You can explore biology and still believe in the creation that God was involved in, that he did. And you can marvel at the laws of physics and still worship the lawgiver. Faith doesn't require you to abandon. It invites you to go beyond reason, to believe that behind all the order and complexity of the universe is a God who occasionally steps in to remind us, I'm still here, I'm still in control. So, a few things to wrap up with. If we summarize this, science is a tool, it's not a worldview. It tells us how things work, not why they exist. Miracles don't contradict science, they transcend it. They are exceptions, not the norm. And Christianity gave birth to modern science by affirming a rational, ordered universe created by God. Believing in miracles doesn't make you anti-science. It means that you believe the Creator can intervene in His creation. And the resurrection is a miracle that makes all others reasonable. And your life transformed by Christ might be the most convincing miracle someone else ever sees. So if you're wrestling with doubts, you are not alone. God welcomes your questions. He's not threatened by your curiosity. In fact, He is the author of wisdom and knowledge and discovery. So don't fear science and don't be ashamed of believing in miracles. God is still working today, in the seen and the unseen, the explainable and the mysterious. So go ahead and study the stars, explore the laws of nature and dive deep into biology, and then lift your eyes and say, wow, what a God. So I thank you for joining us today on Made for More Ministries podcast. If this episode challenged or encouraged you, maybe share it with someone else. And remember that your faith isn't fragile. It's built on truth and love and the power of a God who still moves. So until next time, keep growing and asking and believing, because you were made for more. God bless you.